So, hey, how's it going? It's been a while. Saw a consensus in Hong Kong in February.
Yeah, it's been a while, but everything in crypto, 1 month is like a whole year or so.
Yes.
So it feels like we haven't seen each other for years. But nice to see you again.
Likewise,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
So, what is AI and gaming? I guess that's the topic of today. So,
Oh God, it's so many things. Where do I start? I mean, first of all, I think they slightly louder. Do I need to shout into this? All right, fine. So first, I mean, the on the gaming side, clearly there's a lot of development tools that are out there. But what I'm most excited about are two things. One of them is vibe coding. So vibe coding is big
okay.
because, of course, anyone can now code their own games
Yeah.
with AI.
Yeah.
It's reached kind of, if you remember back in the day when people were having really bad Instagram filters, but everyone's kind of excited about it. That's kind of the phase we're in right now.
Yeah.
But in about 12 months, you're going to be coding really, really good games without actually having to do much other than explain it. And I actually think vibe coding is kind of like the TikTok moment of gaming, where instead of basically having crazy dance moves, which is kind of cool too, you're going to be able to have basically millions of people make games, which will completely change the landscape of gaming distribution and discovery, which I'm pretty excited about, and is very much sort of pushing the whole creator economy.
So, I guess with then vibe coding, you can have it so that amateurs make their own games,
Right.
right? So,
Yes.
gaming is not then confined to these big studios. It could be from indie people, right? So,
Well, it's not just indie people. It's like imagine, like I see it as a different expression. So imagine, for instance, if you're handing in your homework as a school kid,
Yeah.
you might actually hand in a game, or you can experience, or you can simulate, or you can do something. So we shouldn't look at gaming simply as a realm of fun and entertainment, because actually some of the earliest forms of simulation and the understanding of simulation came from gaming. And in fact, when you think about NVIDIA's discovery of actually the real use case for GPUs and sort of floating point operations came not from the fact that I can play a great game that was fun and that had a use case, but that you could actually now see that you can simulate real life, essentially, with ragdolls and so on, and motion initially for different applications, which then eventually evolved into things like AI compute, Bitcoin mining, right? That all started from that. And so I see that as that evolution. And also see it as something that we go get deeper into. So it's not just about making more games, but it's about how gamification, which if you think about it, gamification has already impacted so much of our own industry and everything else, but really more from a, call it game psychology standpoint. But now you can actually implement these tools inside everything that you do. And for me, gamification is more than just the entertainment side. It's also, can you make work more fun? Can you make learning more fun? Can you make life more fun? Right? And that basically is what games really is.
okay, so this then draws back to the need for AI here, right? If you could vibe code, you can make things easier, right? So anything now is a game, I guess.
Yes, I mean, if you want to be really philosophical, life is a game anyway, right? But you could basically, but what you could do is you could take that deeper into other areas and, like I say, extend that. The other thing, of course, when you talk about AI, is agentic AI.
Yes.
And what most people may not realize is that the form in which most people interact with AI is not ChatGPT, even though it's very successful. It's actually NPCs, non-player characters inside games. But it's the worst, dumbest kind of AI you can think of. The reason why is because cost of AI is still too high for a game to operate like a even a small kind of LLM for the time being. But as the costs come down, and particularly when you talk about token economies, where people can start paying the AI, two things will happen. One, games will become much more immersive as an experience. But two, the actual AI agents inside those games theoretically can become independent themselves. So when you start marrying some of the blockchain technology, things like NFTs, where you can now own an AI that can live inside other games, that can be independent, that can basically be agentic in nature, then actually that's actually where it becomes even wilder. And the wildest part about all of this is that, of course, if it's an agentic AI, it can actually issue its own tokens, right? Which means that they have the ability to create their own money, which means that they have the ability to pay people or to do stuff. And if you want to extend it even further, you can kind of see where that goes. And an interesting stat over the last 4 years, protocols and Web3 games and everything in blockchain paid out about $50 billion roughly in airdrops, which is a big number. But what's the difference between a protocol and an AI agent paying you? For the user, no difference whatsoever.
Right.
So we're already accustomed to be paid by things or units that we don't know, that we never interact and see. So if an AI agent is paying you tokens that it created because, it launched it on pump.fun and it just suddenly worth $100 million or whatever that might be, right? Um, who's to say that you're working for an AI now? I think that's kind of the future, whether you like it or not. Right.
Okay, so how about then Animoca? Like, what is your role here? You want to incubate this, invest in this, and you guys primarily invest in crypto companies. Is there then a crypto angle to invest in?
Absolutely. So there's two lenses. One, we've invested today in probably over 60 AI companies that are sort of working either directly or adjacently in the space. And we think all of these are important. That's kind of one way that we're engaging this. Of course, not just for gaming, but for other things as well. But broadly speaking, I would argue that for most people, investing in crypto is the natural hedge to an AI future for most people. Now, why do I say that?
How so? Yeah.
Yeah, it's because when you think about in the physical world as humans, our scarce and natural resource is the land, is the place we're in, so real estate, or maybe commodities that we use to produce stuff, right? Well, what is the commodity that is used in AI? Sure, it's electricity and it's compute. How is it represented? Through crypto, through tokens. Now, which tokens is another question, right? But the point is that the real estate, as it were, the assets of agentic AI is going to be crypto. And so most people are not going to have the ability to invest in OpenAI or ChatGPT, and who knows if they succeed in the long term, or Perplexity. It's also difficult for them. So, for instance, when you are living in the physical world, how do you partake in the success of a nation or the growth of something? You probably buy a house in the area, or you might buy some bonds or your stocks. It's your index of the environment that you're in. Well, the index of that environment is crypto. So that's actually another thing that I think all of us here who are in the crypto space are inadvertently, whether we like it or not, hedging ourselves against an AI future.
But what crypto though, right? Is it Bitcoin, Ether, or is it like a BitTensor? Not to endorse one token, but when you say AI equals crypto, it's a very broad statement. Like, is there a certain subset of crypto?
Well, you're
broadly.
I mean, you're asking me to say kind of like, it's kind of like asking the question 1,000 years ago. Do you think land in Africa will be more valuable, or land in China, or land in Europe, right? That's kind of the question you're asking. I think one thing that is different, though, but that we can measure better today, is that the value of a token comes from the network effect. Yeah. Right? And so what AI does is it has the ability to enhance these network effects because you're using it. One very simple example, which is a very primitive form of network effect, is the tradability, right? I mean, the fact that we can use money around the world adds a network, right? In fact, money is the original, I would say, probably the original big social network, right? It's because of money that I can do business with someone around the world, I can trade, and from that I can build a relationship with. And that's basically what AI agents will do with crypto in an accelerated fashion, right? And so they can help build those. So then, of course, you might say, let's go for the biggest network, right? So let's go with Bitcoin. That's one element to look at it. But we are so early in this space, right, that we don't really have a winner. I have some views around Bitcoin as well, but that's a different story.
Please, I've got the stage.
I don't know who's controversial or not, but to the point about AI is that I think having Bitcoin long term, you're fine, but Bitcoin is like gold, right? So today, gold is the largest single asset and has been really since forever. But there was a time when gold was the single largest asset, period, like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? Today, gold is the largest asset, but in comparison to all other assets in IP, in listed companies, like for instance, the value of public companies today is about $128 trillion, which is pretty respectable. And gold is around 24 trillion, or well, it's gone up again, so who knows, right? But either way, right? So gold is larger than Apple and Facebook or Google, but it's not larger than the entire market caps of companies combined. So you take that lens and you say, okay, if Bitcoin is gold, what about altcoins, or shitcoins, as Bitcoiners like to call them, right? Well, altcoins represents the innovation index because we're building on altcoins. We're developing on them. They're the ones that the AI are using as well, right? So that means I don't expect Ethereum or Solana or any one of those tokens to ever be bigger than Bitcoin. However, I do expect that collectively, altcoins, which is today about half the size of Bitcoin, will ultimately be 10, 20 times larger than Bitcoin when we have more mass adoption, but distributed over millions and millions of tokens.
Right. It's not centralized under one token, but a whole constellation of tokens.
Yeah. And the main point on this is that it's this idea of inflation, right? because of course that's what Bitcoiners hate, right? But the problem is if you live in a deflationary world, you actually will fight over it, and there's wars over it, all that kind of stuff. And if we assume that gold was the only currency in the world, which maybe some people would have liked, right? Then you would actually restrict innovation and growth, because what comes from us as people, our ideas, our innovation, actually these companies didn't exist before out of a finite resource, because our imagination isn't finite. The universe isn't finite. We keep growing children. Broadly speaking, we're expanding, right? Yes. And the universe is expanding. So we can't expect everything to just stay put in a single unit. So you need a store of value, but for growth, you basically need something that can inflate and grow. And that's what altcoins represent. I mean, Apple and Google and Facebook were tiny companies and they have so much value, but they've developed something valuable from really imagination, ideas, and innovation.
The AI doomers say that AI devalues human labor, right? The ultimate resource in the world are humans and our labor. So what do you say to the doomers that say that this whole thing will make us less valuable, us, and our labor?
So, I mean, so it comes from the perspective, which a lot of people in AI, some people in AI say, is that we are just biological computers, right? It comes from the perspective of, well, basically, if a computer is faster at computing, and an AI and is just a better human computer, then of course we're screwed, right? Because ultimately, over the longer term, they're going to succeed. However, if you take the view that humans are beyond computing, that life as we are is not entirely computational, then we'll always have some kind of an edge. And so the perspective, call me, I don't know if you want to call it sort of, like a coping mechanism or whatever.
Yeah.
But my view is that humans are not just simply computational. And there are some interesting, like if you look at things like Gödel's inclusivity theorem, for those of you not familiar, it's basically, in very simple terms, has proved that the axioms of math cannot be proven, even though they're true, right? And so there's different elements around it. And if you also look at like quantum mechanics, the whole probabilistic nature of, I guess, the universe, if you will, there are elements around nature that seem to indicate that we as humans, and Sir Roger Penrose,
Yep,
most famously spoke about that. He's not a big believer in that we're computational, right? And so don't take it from me, take it from Nobel laureates and really smart people. And as a result, I feel like we have more to gain from AI, because AI is the supercomputer that will enhance our ability to do creative things in AI through AI, kind of in a very primitive way, how the calculator made us all good with math. AI will make us more creative and elevate us as humans rather than actually sort of pushing us down.
Okay, then the question then would be perhaps, can we scale AI, right? Do we have enough power, enough resources, enough GPUs to make sure that every game in the future has an AI component, or every worker has an AI co-pilot on their desk?
So okay, so I would say the challenge on compute is the challenge on energy.
Yes.
Right. And I actually think that we're getting better and better at energy. If you take a look at China, for instance, today, I mean, China is actually probably the largest producer now of essentially sort of regenerative energy, and is not relying on essentially fossil fuels as much as before. But of course, it's accelerating. I think technology will just get us faster there. The optimistic view is AI will help us get into faster, more efficient energy production. Again, whether we get to cold fusion or not, the point is that I think we'll just get into better, more efficient energy production. And as a result of that, we're going to get better with AI. The other thing is, if you look at DeepSeek, right, DeepSeek, it is, of course, technology, but it came from a human observation about how we as humans learn better, how we create expert models, and thereby actually creating a lower cost of energy and computation to create very similar effects. So we have this race going both ways. We're getting better at energy cost, but we're also getting better at being more efficient. And, we see this, for instance, in very simple terms with like, Moore's law, Kreider's law, like all of those sort of technology frameworks that demonstrate that cost will keep going down. So I'm not worried about that we won't get there, whether it's 5 or 10 years, but we'll get there.
Okay, so speaking of DeepSeek, there's an argument to be made that there's now an Eastern and Western AI camp, where you have the Chinese AI jurisdiction and the Western AI jurisdiction. So A, do you agree with that? And B, can crypto kind of bridge that gap? Can crypto make sure that there is a way to use the world's AI algorithms without having to have a allegiance to like one political bloc?
So I'm not of the view that there's going to be one AI
Okay.
to rule them all. And that's because AI ultimately still feeds off human intuition, innovation, ideas. So my view is that actually we're going to have very many AIs around the world that will reflect certain human biases and preferences. Right. So there's no question that if you're going to be using ChatGPT, you're going to be getting Western biases because of all the resources that it gets from.
Yeah.
But you can't say that those values are necessarily the ones that will translate well in China, for example. Right. Independent of the fact that they're obviously separated from each other, there are distinctions between them. And just as we form as communities where we tend to gravitate towards that share our values and ideas, we will gravitate towards using AI in this way. And in many ways, the truth that we seek isn't necessarily ultimate, right? I mean, if you think about relationships, if you think about how we do business, if we think about framing of life, actually, it's not like one rule fits all, right? So I don't think that's the way I think certainly would look at it. What I think the slightly tragic part is that, and we see this with the internet, is I actually think different nationalities and cultures and so on should be using more AI and build them within their own frameworks to preserve those cultures. Right. So if you look at, for instance, what the internet has done, yes, you could say it's made the word flatter and more global. But on the other hand, the whole world is getting information from the same sources, right? Whether it's Google or Facebook in many of these places. In my view, for instance, Europe has been entirely colonized by American technology. And it's one of the reasons why we do not have many, I mean, outside of regulations, that's another one, but reasons why you don't have very strong European companies, even though it's got everything else. It's got, super smart people, great universities, good framing, society, safety for the most part. And then you look at Korea, much smaller as a country as compared to Europe, but it ended up having this kind of, let's call it digital protectionism. So for those of you who come to Korea, Google Maps doesn't quite work the way you want it to work because you have to use Naver. But now Korea has a domestic market. It has the ability to compete with Google. It's got their own framing of companies, and it actually has a vibrant digital society that is independent of America.
But that sounds quite protectionist. It's not free trade. It sounds like if you have to protect your own companies to prevent Google from being this hegemon, this, market force, they won't grow up and compete with Google.
So I'm an advocate for free markets, but I'm not but a free market also requires you not to have monopolies, right? And so you don't have and America unfortunately has failed in its antitrust mission. Probably, I don't know when the last major antitrust thing happened, maybe with Microsoft, like some 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago, right? So antitrust is dead, and now the corporations have become so powerful and monopolistic, not just with lobbying power, but everything else, that it's just not going to get there, right? So I think countries don't have a choice, but they have to basically protect their societies, as it were, right? And there is still free trade. It's just that you want to make sure that you don't have monopolies entering in those areas. Otherwise, you end up having these problems around the world that we see today. And so just to be clear, this entire anti-globalization push that we have doesn't come from the fact, in my view, that we don't have that the world isn't more open or fair in terms of ways it can communicate with each other. It's the fact that we have a small number of corporations that have so much power that they've become global monopolies.
Right.
And countries can't come together to deal with these monopolies and don't know how to do that. So whereas if we didn't have these monopolies, I don't think we'd have these problems around the sort of, so-called fair trade global issues because you wouldn't have the same monopolistic behaviors that exist.
Interesting. From AI and gaming now to fair trade. Okay, so aside from AI, like what else are you guys working on right now? What else is,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we're doing. I would say 3 or 4 major topics that we like to see. First, we're very bullish on Web3 gaming next year because of GTA 6, right?
Okay.
So that's something very big. And the reason why I say this is because
why GTA 6?
Oh, well, so and generally why just gaming? So gaming has broadly been flat over the last couple of years for a couple of reasons. One, competition with TikTok, obviously from a attention standpoint. 2, revenue for gaming has been roughly the same because people aren't charging more for gaming. So the cost of a game is the same as it was 10 years ago, but the cost of milk is higher. The cost of labor is higher. So gaming companies have been struggling because they haven't been able to make, in real money terms, more money, right? Meanwhile, the dollar has been inflated 300%, right? So that's kind of the one issue. The other issue, and the other thing is that there's just less babies being born. I mean, that's just the truth in developing countries. So that means you have less. I'm not saying that people, when they get older, do play games, but the population growth of the people growing into that is not. And so crypto gaming is interesting because there's about 3.4 billion people who play games, but there's 3 billion who do not play games, right? And they don't play games because they don't enjoy looking at it or using it. It's just complicated. It takes time, right? However, with crypto, you can now actually be an owner in a game. You can participate in it. So my mom can basically own assets of the games that her grandchildren play, and that's a way that you can interact. So you expand the audience without expanding the gamer audience, if you will, right? So that's kind of one element. Why GTA 6? Well, so tokens generally are mimetic in nature, not just because of the network effects, but because they mimic markets. They're basically the same as stock prices and commodities, right? They're just digital versions of them. So if Trump is hot, then Trump token goes up. If AI is hot, AI tokens go up. Don't tell me that AI utility in crypto is higher than, gaming utility. Gaming utility in Web3 is much higher than that. But the narrative in the market of AI is hot. But gaming isn't hot in the stock market either. So what will make gaming hot is the biggest cultural event in gaming ever, which is GTA 6, right? And then the other side effect is that GTA has this thing called RP servers. And so it allows basically companies to run their own crypto rails on these GTA servers. The reason why Take-Two, which is the owner of GTA, has been so negative is because of the previous administration, right? Now you don't have to be as aggressively pushing back on crypto when you basically have a much more positive administration.
Okay, so to your first point that gaming companies aren't doing well because of a lack of ways to monetize these
in a relative sense.
Relative sense, of course, right? But then if you talk to gamers, they don't like things like DLCs. They don't like things like buying new features. They don't like we're on Assassin's Creed 47 right now, right? But so do gamers want Web3 gaming? Like, do they want to be monetized more? Or do they want things like cool stories, good graphics, and a fun experience?
So I would argue that while gamers are focused obviously on the content and the social aspect,
yes, yeah.
Assets themselves enhance the social aspect and is why you actually play games. So there's this thing in gaming called Bartle's taxonomy. And Bartle's taxonomy is a way in which we describe what kind of gamer we have. And we put them basically in 4 quadrants, right? There's the killer. Those are the psychopaths who just love to play games to kill people.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have adventurers, and then you have achievers, and then you have social. And the killers are roughly less than 1%. So it's good to know because that means the world is roughly 1% psychopaths, which we see, but there we go. Then you have the achievers and then you have the adventurers. They're roughly 10% each. They're actually the ones who draw the audiences in. They play the game because they love to achieve or they want to level up. And then they bring all their friends in, right? And the 80%, that's the friends. So basically, most games are basically social networks. If you ask your children, like, why are you playing Roblox? Because my friends are playing it, right? They're not playing it because they just want to get to a certain stage. And so that's actually what gaming is. And now, why do Web3 assets and assetization and tokenization comes in? Because they grease the social engine, right? If I have something that is an asset, I can, like, people pay a lot of money for these skins. Why do they pay a lot of money for these skins? Because it's a social attribution. It's something of value, right? And I get to keep it. And now I can keep it forever, for instance. The reason why, one would argue that gamers don't like it is more of a Western narrative, right? And that Western narrative comes from the fact that most people in the West, especially younger people, are not very attuned to capitalism. And they're generally more on the socialist side of things, having not grown up in a life of plenty, not having to worry about food on the table like our parents did, and take that for granted. Go to Asia, actually, you're in Korea, you have a lot of young people, they're crazy about crypto, they're crazy about blockchain, gaming, and crypto. And the reason why is because they're both young, dynamic, and they love capitalism, right? And, I think I've said this before, but the American dream is much more alive and well in Asia than it is in America, right? And for that reason. So I think this anti-NFT and crypto thing in gaming is more of an attitude towards capitalism and financial literacy, which is a different topic, but it's something that we have to deal with.
Right. Interesting stuff. All right. To wrap things up, what is one forecast you have for the next year?
Oh, I think we're going to get to 1 billion people holding crypto. That's probably an easy forecast, right?
Okay.
But more specifically, I'm more excited about what happens on chain, right? And so I do think we're going to go past 100 to 150 million people that are truly on chain doing stuff. Whether this is RWA stuff, stablecoin stuff, doesn't really matter. right? And that to me is where we reach the escape velocity, where people will move more and more on chain. We're seeing versions of this now, like Hyperliquid, stuff like that going, really starting to sort of become a little bit of a real competitor towards actually centralized exchanges and centralized platforms. And I think we'll hit that breaking point in the next year or so, where actually we're going to do more stuff there. And of course, blockchain gaming, I think is going to hit its moment with GTA 6 if it's not delayed again. It's been delayed for 8 years.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens.
Check poly market right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that was great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Cool.